So I run the Science Commons project at Creative Commons. We're a nonprofit project that is trying to make the web work for science the way that it works for culture and for commerce. So we sort of take for granted that you can go to the internet and get an accurate answer to a question about shoes or hotel rooms, and that you can then order those things, and that it's easy to find someone you went to high school with. But in science and in research in general, the web doesn't work that well. So you can't enter a query about genes and proteins into Google and get a very accurate answer out. And you can't order the tools that would help you explore those genes in a laboratory very easily. We think that by bringing some of these powers that the web gives to users, that we can actually dramatically lower the cost of finding cures for diseases and increase the power that we as individuals have over our own healthcare. The fundamental thing is that the web, as it's formatted, is a very simple system for making documents connect to documents. When you click on a web page, it pulls up another web page. It pulls up a document which is linked to it. And that's great for shoes and hotel rooms and blog pages and photographs. What it's not so good for is complex scientific research, because this really is the higher calling of the web in many ways, is not to help us find pictures of cats that have funny slogans on them. It is the power to put us together in a way that lets us all start taking control of our own health care, and to make it possible and cheap enough that we can find cures for diseases that right now aren't financially viable. One of the only non-miraculous ways we have to go after this is to bring the power of the crowd to it. But if we're going to bring the power of the crowd, we have to restructure the information first. The actual physical stuff that scientists use to do science is moving around very poorly, and just like Amazon lets you move books around the real world using the network, we were looking at the legal and technical systems to move these scientific materials around the real world using the network. And so the reason I'm here today is that another Kauffman-funded project called the iBridge Network, which is actually sort of building the Amazon transaction system for this type of work, is sort of a sister project of ours. And it sort of shows how if you think about these things as networks, you can really begin to get the sort of innovation that you want out of the system. My instinct is to sort of geek out and get technical, but as an entrepreneur, you have to train yourself to try to communicate. If you're going to connect with people, you've got to find an emotional layer of the discussion, and stories are a window into that emotional connection with people. So when we talk about the impact of the current drug discovery process, I like to talk about river blindness. So 18 million people worldwide are infected with the parasite that causes river blindness. It blinds about 300,000 people. 18 million people in the United States would be a market for a drug. But because these people live below the poverty line in tropical countries, there's no market. And what we're trying to do is to make it so that it's actually financially viable for someone to go cure these people, to create a market in which one can be rewarded for doing that. The old norms of science, which are also known as the Mertonian norms of science, which are inherently communal. But over the last 25 years, a series of changes to laws, a series of changes in sort of court judgments about intellectual property, and a series of changes in sort of the entrepreneurial culture have really eroded those norms, those communal norms of science. The default position now is to lock it up and see if it's valuable later, instead of a default position being, what's the right scientific thing to do? Maybe my instinct shouldn't be, how can I protect this? To me, entrepreneurs are people who are crazy enough to think that they can do something that hasn't ever happened before and build sort of nonlinear value out of that. Whether that is corporate value or social value is really not as relevant as the delusion that you're capable of doing something that has never been done before and that will create this nonlinear change in the world. As a for-profit entrepreneur, your exit is the sale of the company or the IPO. As a nonprofit entrepreneur, you have to think more creatively about what an exit means. It's not that different running a nonprofit versus a for-profit. It's just you're selling value either way, and you're creating value either way, and you're managing and raising money either way. It's just that your reward structures are different. You're never going to get into an IPO, but your odds of that were low anyway, and instead of an IPO, you might save the world. Institutions are institutions, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit. And entrepreneurship shakes up all of those sectors. And I think on average, it's one of the things that that really has made the United States and other entrepreneurial economies so successful. And so having a foundation that really thinks about that, I think, is really important.